The transit lounge on station perihelion smelled like recycled air and disappointment. Tobias Marsh had been breathing it for 6 hours, which meant he'd achieved a kind of Zen acceptance of his fate. The shuttle to Hadrian's Reach was delayed due to what the station cheerfully called unforeseen mechanical considerations, which Tobias translated as, "We have no idea what's wrong, and we're hoping it fixes itself." He'd claimed a bench near the viewport, his battered leather bag serving as a pillow, his equally battered paperback open in his hands. The book was a pre-space thriller about corporate espionage that had aged poorly but remained entertaining. Around him, the lounge hosted perhaps 24 other stranded travelers in various states of irritation. The woman sat down beside him an hour into his wait, choosing his bench despite several empty ones nearby. Tobias registered her presence peripherally, Kaelthari, based on the ears, dressed in nondescript gray travel clothes, carrying a small pack that looked well used. She didn't ask permission to share his space, just settled in with the ease of someone accustomed to claiming territory. "The coffee here is an atrocity," she said after a while, nodding toward the dispenser across the room. "I've had worse," Tobias replied without looking up from his book. "There's a station near the Procyon Gate that serves something they claim is coffee, but I'm pretty sure it's recycled coolant fluid." "That sounds like a health violation." "It's absolutely a health violation. I reported it, nothing changed." Tobias turned a page. "People keep drinking it anyway. I think we've all just accepted that space travel involves mild poisoning." She made a sound that might have been amusement. They sat in silence after that, the comfortable kind that exists between strangers with no investment in impressing each other. Tobias appreciated people who understood that silence wasn't awkward, just peaceful. The station announcement system crackled to life, a cheerful voice informing them that the delay would continue for an undetermined period. Tobias and the woman exchanged a look of shared resignation. "I had a meeting on Hadrian's Reach," she said. "Past tense had. Data courier job for me," Tobias offered. "Client will just have to wait, not like the information is time-sensitive. Just genetic research data for some agricultural concern." "Riveting. It pays for fuel and food. I've delivered worse. Last month I transported someone's collection of pre-space ceramic cats across 2 systems. Were the cats at least interesting? They were profoundly ugly. I became emotionally attached to 3 of them." This time she definitely laughed, quick and genuine. They fell back into silence, Tobias reading, the woman watching the other travelers with an expression he couldn't quite identify. Assessment maybe, or simply boredom. Another hour passed. Tobias finished a chapter and started another. His coffee, because he'd eventually succumbed to the terrible dispenser, had gone cold. The woman beside him shifted occasionally, checking a datapad that she kept at an angle he couldn't see. Not that he tried. Other people's business was other people's business. "You're very calm," she observed at one point. "I'm very tired," Tobias corrected. "There's a difference, but the end result looks similar." "You travel often." "Constantly. It's the job. You pick up a package here, drop it there, repeat until you've seen enough stars that they stop looking romantic and start looking like navigation hazards." "That's bleak. That's realistic. Romance is for people with stable addresses." Tobias glanced at her. "You travel much." "More than I'd like." Something in her voice suggested layers he wasn't going to dig into. "Always someone wanting me somewhere else. The galaxy's very demanding that way." She smiled, small and private, and returned her attention to her datapad. The lounge continued its slow rhythm. A family with 3 children occupied one corner, the kids entertaining themselves with a holographic game that made soft chiming sounds. An elderly Vraxian merchant slept on a bench, his respirator humming steadily. 2 business types argued in low voices about missed opportunities and incompetent logistics coordinators. Tobias had learned to read rooms like this during his years as a courier. You developed an instinct for trouble, for the person who might cause a scene or the situation about to escalate. Nothing here triggered his radar, just ordinary people trapped in the purgatory of transit delays. The woman stood abruptly, and everything changed. Tobias felt it before he understood it, the way air pressure seems to shift before a storm. The woman's entire bearing transformed as she rose. Her shoulders rolled back, her chin lifted, and suddenly the tired traveler disappeared beneath something far more deliberate. Her movements carried weight now, authority compressed into simple gestures. Two maintenance workers across the lounge moved in perfect synchronization, their casual postures evaporating into trained precision. Their hands went to their belts where Tobias now saw the distinct shapes of pulse weapons poorly concealed beneath work vests. The exit sealed. Not slowly, not with warning, just a pneumatic hiss and the heavy thunk of magnetic locks engaging. The sound echoed through the lounge like a door slamming in a tomb. The elderly Vraxian jerked awake. The family's children stopped mid-game, their mother pulling them close with instinctive protection. The business types froze, hands raised reflexively. The woman, not a woman, Tobias corrected himself, something far more complicated than that, spoke into the sudden silence. Her voice carried the same transformation as her posture, musical but edged with command that made it clear she expected immediate obedience. "I am Sentinel-Queen Veyara of the Third Ascendancy. This chamber is now under sovereign jurisdiction. You will comply with all directives from my security detail." More guards materialized from positions Tobias hadn't noticed them occupying. The station janitor who'd been cleaning near the viewport dropped his equipment and drew a weapon. One of the business types, the one who'd been complaining about logistics, produced credentials that identified him as part of the security team. The pregnant woman who'd been napping 3 benches over stood with the fluid grace of trained military. Her supposed condition revealed as tactical padding concealing armor. Tobias counted 8 guards total, all armed, all positioned to control the room with minimal effort. Professional work. They'd been embedded among the travelers for hours, maybe since before he'd arrived. The other occupants of the lounge reacted predictably. The Vraxian merchant dropped immediately to his knees, his respirator wheezing with sudden stress. The business type who wasn't secretly a guard fell to a crouch, hands behind his head, clearly familiar with arrest protocols. The family clustered together, the father shielding his children while stammering apologies for nothing in particular. Veyara's eyes swept the room, cataloging responses with the efficiency of someone trained to read submission, fear, and threat assessment. Her gaze passed over the kneeling, the cowering, the compliant. Then it reached Tobias. He hadn't moved, still sat on his bench, book open in his lap, cold coffee in his hand. He looked at her, not through her, not past her, but directly at her, with an expression that suggested he was simply waiting for her to finish so he could return to his chapter. Veyara's eyes narrowed. One of her guards noticed Tobias's stillness and barked in sharp Kaelthari, "Kneel, now." Tobias glanced at the guard, then back to Veyara. He didn't speak, didn't argue, just waited, patient as stone. The guard moved forward, weapon rising to a more aggressive angle. "I said." Veyara raised one hand, a gesture so slight it barely qualified as movement, but the guard froze mid-step as if he'd hit a physical barrier. The Sentinel-Queen approached Tobias herself, her boots making soft sounds against the station floor. She circled him slowly, studying him from multiple angles like he was an artifact in a museum that didn't match its catalog description. "You understand who I am," she said. Not a question, a statement that demanded confirmation of comprehension. "I do," Tobias replied. His voice was quiet, conversational, the same tone he'd used when discussing terrible coffee. "Then you understand your position." "I understand that I'm sitting in a transit lounge waiting for a shuttle that's already 6 hours delayed, and that you've just made that wait significantly more interesting." The Vraxian merchant made a sound like a wounded animal. The father, covering his children, whispered something that sounded like a prayer. One guard's hand tightened on their weapon, waiting for the order that would turn this calm human into a cautionary example. But Veyara's expression cycled through something complex, annoyance first, then confusion, settling finally into what might have been fascination. She completed her circle, stopping directly in front of Tobias, close enough that he had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. "You're not afraid," she said. "I didn't say that. But you're not running, not begging, not even bothering to stand." "Would standing change anything?" Tobias asked reasonably. "The doors are sealed, your guards have weapons. I have a book and cold coffee. The tactical situation seems fairly clear. And yet you sit." I was sitting comfortably, seemed ashamed to ruin it. One of the guards made a noise that might have been a strangled laugh, quickly suppressed. Veyara's lips twitched, fighting something that wanted to be a smile. She gestured to her security detail. "Perimeter. Maintain lockdown protocol, but give us space." The guards obeyed instantly, withdrawing to positions near the sealed exits, weapons lowered but ready. The other prisoners, because that's what they'd become, remained frozen in their various postures of submission, too terrified to move without explicit permission. Veyara sat down beside Tobias again, in the exact spot she'd occupied before her revelation. The pretense was gone now, the disguise of the tired traveler abandoned, but she returned to their shared bench as if claiming familiar territory. "Why aren't you afraid?" she asked, and this time it was genuine curiosity rather than interrogation. Tobias considered the question, marked his place in his book with a finger, and took a sip of his awful coffee before answering. "I am afraid." Veyara studied the human beside her with the intensity she usually reserved for treaty negotiations and intelligence briefings. In her training, in her decades of rule, she'd been taught to read people through their reactions to power. Fear revealed weakness, negotiation revealed desperation, submission revealed the broken, and defiance revealed the foolish. But this calm acceptance, this didn't fit any category in her mental framework. "You're either remarkably brave or remarkably stupid," she said. "Third option, remarkably aware of my own limitations." Tobias set down his coffee on the bench between them. "I'm a data courier. I transport information from point A to point B. I have no political affiliations, no corporate backing, no leverage of any kind. I'm not important enough to kidnap, not wealthy enough to ransom, and not connected enough to use as a bargaining chip. Which means whatever this is," he gestured vaguely at the locked room and armed guards, "probably isn't about me." "You're very confident about that assessment." "I've been doing this for 11 years. You learn to recognize when you're a target versus when you're just nearby when something interesting happens." Tobias met her eyes again, and Veyara felt that same unsettling jolt of being truly seen rather than merely observed. "So, am I a target or collateral?" The honest answer surprised her into giving it. "Collateral, you were simply here. Then I'll wait quietly until I'm no longer needed for whatever operational security this represents, and then I'll catch my shuttle. Assuming it ever gets fixed." He returned to his book, actually returned to it as if their conversation had reached a natural conclusion. Veyara laughed. She couldn't help it. A real laugh, unguarded and surprised, the kind of sound her advisors would be shocked to hear. Several of her guards turned at the noise, hands twitching toward weapons, confused by their queen expressing genuine amusement. "I've been traveling in disguise," Veyara explained, though she wasn't entirely sure why she felt the need to explain anything to this peculiar human. "Gathering intelligence on how these neutral stations truly function when no one knows I'm watching. I wanted to observe the real operations, the small corruptions, the way power flows when royalty isn't present to distort the patterns." "Find anything interesting?" "I found you." Tobias looked up from his book. "I'm deeply uninteresting. Ask anyone who's ever tried to have a conversation with me about anything besides old books and good coffee." "You treated me like an equal." You were sitting in a transit lounge complaining about coffee. We were equals, both trapped, both annoyed, both making the best of a bad situation. I'm a Sentinel-Queen, ruler of the Third Ascendancy, commander of 17 fleet groups, and sovereign of 43 worlds. And 6 hours ago, you were a tired traveler sharing my bench and agreeing that station coffee is an atrocity against sentient life. Tobias closed his book, giving her his full attention now. The title doesn't change the person, just the performance everyone else is required to maintain around them. Veyara felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of truth she'd been avoiding for years. You're saying I'm performing right now. Aren't you? The posture, the voice, the guards, the sealed room, it's theater. Very effective theater, obviously, given that everyone else is currently trying not to wet themselves in terror. But still theater. Theater that keeps order, that maintains structure, that ensures compliance. Sure, but you can't maintain it forever. Eventually, you're just a person sitting in a transit lounge waiting for a delayed shuttle. Tobias picked up his terrible coffee again, examined it with the expression of someone contemplating poison, and took a sip anyway. The performance exhausts you. I can see it. You were more relaxed an hour ago when you were pretending to be nobody important. Veyara wanted to argue, to defend the necessity of her authority, the weight of responsibility that required the performance he was so casually dismissing. But she looked at the room, at her guards maintaining rigid protocol, at the other travelers frozen in fear, at the entire elaborate machinery of power she'd activated with a single revelation, and felt tired. What would you do? She asked quietly, if you were me. Unseal the doors, let these people go. Stop performing for an audience that can't appreciate the show anyway because they're too terrified to think straight. Tobias shrugged, but I'm not you. I don't have your responsibilities or your problems. I just carry data and read old books. You make it sound simple. It probably isn't. Nothing ever is once you add power to the equation. But sitting here, talking to you as a person rather than a title, feels simpler than whatever complicated thing this has become. Veyara stood, and her guards tensed immediately, reading the shift in her body language as a precursor to orders. She looked at them, loyal, trained, dedicated to her protection and the protocols that governed every interaction she had with the wider galaxy. Then she looked at the cowering travelers, people whose only crime was being present when she decided to reveal herself. She made a decision that would horrify her security chief. Stand down, she told her guards. Unseal the exits. Release everyone with standard non-disclosure protocols and compensation credits. This operation is concluded. Your Majesty, the guard captain started, his voice tight with concern. Did I stutter, Captain Sarek? Veyara's voice carried all the authority she'd just been discussing, but now it was focused, deliberate, a tool rather than a costume. These people are no threat. This situation is no threat. Unseal the doors. The captain hesitated for exactly 1 second, a lifetime in military terms, then obeyed. The locks disengaged with the same pneumatic hiss that had sealed them. The other travelers didn't move immediately, too shocked or too afraid to trust their sudden freedom. You may leave, Veyara told them, gentler now. Station security will provide compensation for your inconvenience and ensure your continued discretion. You have my apology for the disruption. They fled, not in panic but with the hurried purpose of people who'd been granted an unexpected reprieve and weren't about to question it. Within 90 seconds, the lounge was empty except for Veyara, her guards positioned at discreet distances, and Tobias, still sitting on their bench with his book and terrible coffee. Veyara sat down again. Not as a queen, not as a performance, just as someone taking a seat beside someone else. Your shuttle, she said after a moment, will be delayed another 2 hours. My security team needs to process this incident with station administration, and that takes time. Of course it does. Tobias sighed, but it was the resigned sigh of someone who'd expected exactly this outcome. Bureaucracy moves at the speed of molasses, regardless of who's involved. I could arrange for better coffee while you wait. I do technically have that authority. That would actually be an abuse of power I could support. Veyara smiled, signaled one of her guards, and within minutes, 2 cups of genuinely good coffee appeared, procured from the station administrator's private reserve. Tobias took an experimental sip and made a sound of genuine pleasure. "Now this is worth the wait," he said. They sat together in the mostly empty lounge, a queen and a courier, both waiting for shuttles, both drinking coffee that didn't taste like an industrial accident. The guards maintained their perimeter, confused but obedient, watching their Sentinel-Queen engage in something as mundane as sharing a bench with a stranger. "Thank you," Veyara said eventually. "For what? I didn't do anything." "You reminded me that authority only exists in the spaces where people grant it, and that sometimes the person underneath the performance needs to breathe. You're welcome, I think, though honestly I was just trying to finish my book." Veyara laughed again, and this time it didn't surprise her guards. They were learning, she thought, to recognize that their queen contained multitudes, including the capacity to sit beside a human courier and simply exist without the weight of crowns and protocols. When Tobias's shuttle finally was called 2 hours later, Veyara walked him to the boarding gate. It violated approximately 17 security protocols, but Captain Sarek had given up arguing 40 minutes ago. "Safe travels, Tobias Marsh," Veyara said formally. "Safe travels, Veyara," he replied, deliberately omitting the title. She smiled, appreciated the gesture, and watched him board. As his shuttle pulled away from the station, she stood at the viewport and realized she felt lighter than she had in years. Dignity without power.